Imagine you're a major in a Quartermaster Corps during World War II. You're stationed in Europe. The rain hasn't stopped for 3 weeks. The mud is indescribable. It's not just a dirt, it's a living thing that swallows trucks, boots, and morale. You just signed requisitions today for 80,000 rations type C and 120,000 rations type K. The motor pool is down and has limited availability to move these rations to the front line where they're needed. You're trading favors with an artillery battalion just to get 2.5-ton trucks you need. The men at the front are cold, wet, and surviving on chocolate bars and instant coffee. They say an army marches on its stomach. Right now, this army is crawling on its belly, and it's your job to feed it. This sentiment was shared by every single supply officer, NCO, and general in the European and Pacific theaters. When we think of World War II, we think of the Sherman tank, the M1 Garand, and the thunder of B-17s roaring overhead. But the single most important weapon of war might have been this. This is a K-ration, a breakfast, dinner, and supper that fit in a soldier's pocket, and this is a C-ration, the finest canned meal the 1940s could produce. Feeding 16 million American service members deployed across 2 oceans and 6 continents was the single greatest logistical challenge for the Americans during World War II. The American GI on paper and in person was the best fed soldier in the world. But the journey from a farm in Iowa to a foxhole in Bastogne was a brutal, complex, and sometimes failing miracle. Before a single bullet was fired, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps was already at war. Their job was to procure, manage, and deliver everything an Army needs, and the number one commodity was food. Let's talk numbers because the scale is staggering. By 1944, the Army was planning to feed 8 million soldiers deployed overseas. The daily requirement was approximately 6 pounds of food per soldier per day. That's 48 million pounds of food, or 24,000 tons, that had to be sourced, packaged, inspected, and shipped every single day. To get food from the United States to Europe, the Army created a pipeline. This pipeline was projected to be 90 days long. That meant that on D-Day, the food that a soldier was eating in Normandy had likely been packaged in a Chicago factory in early March. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, was a logistics man before he was a combat commander. He famously said, "You will not find it difficult to prove that battles, campaigns, and even wars have been won or lost primarily because of logistics." He knew the M1 Garand was useless if the soldier carrying it hadn't eaten in 3 days. The Quartermaster solution was an alphabet soup of rations, designed for every conceivable combat scenario. Let's take ourselves up to the front. You're a rifleman in the 29th Infantry Division, pushing through the hedgerows of Normandy. You're miles from the nearest kitchen. You're in active combat. You eat what you carry, and what you carry is the K-ration. The K-ration was developed by psychologist Ansel Keys, yes, the man who later studied the Mediterranean diet, as a lightweight, calorie-dense ration for airborne troops. It soon became the standard for all frontline troops. It was small, wax-coated to be waterproof, and contained 3 separate units: breakfast, dinner, and supper. The K didn't stand for anything, though the soldiers joked it stood for K-Rations, C-rations, and D-rations. By the time you get to the front, you're near dead anyways. So what was in a K-ration? Let's open one up. Let's start with the breakfast unit, which was the most popular. This contained a canned meat product like chopped ham and egg, 4 K1 biscuits, which is like a hardtack cracker, or 2 K2 cereal biscuits, a fruit bar that was dense like a modern energy bar, a packet of instant coffee, a pack of 3 or 4 cigarettes, usually Camels, Chesterfields, or Lucky Strikes, sugar cubes, and chewing gum. The next one was the dinner unit, which was for a midday meal. That had a small tin of processed cheese like a paste or a veal loaf, 4 K1 biscuits, a packet of 15 Defense brand hard candies, a sugar drink mix, lemon or orange, which the soldiers hated and often threw away, and more cigarettes and gum. And finally, the supper unit. A canned meat, usually a pork luncheon meat, think of Spam, or a sausage. 4 K1 biscuits, a 2-ounce D-ration chocolate bar, more on that later, or a tropical chocolate bar, toilet paper, and more cigarettes. Now that we covered the type of K-rations, how did you eat this? If you were lucky and not under direct fire, you heated it up. Every GI carried the M1942 mess kit. This was a steel kidney-shaped clamshell. One half was a shallow tray plate, the other half was a small frying pan with a folding handle. They also had a steel canteen and canteen cup, which fit neatly together in a canvas pouch. To heat their K-ration ham and eggs, for example, a soldier would pop the top, put the can in his canteen cup with a little water, and heat the whole thing over a small heat tab, or more commonly, a salvage can filled with gasoline-soaked dirt. But what about the coffee? The instant coffee, usually Nescafe, was a godsend. It was one of the few comforts of home. Here's a quote from Private First Class Bill Garnier of the 101st Airborne's Band of Brothers. The first thing in the morning was coffee. You get your canteen cup, put some snow in it, heat it over a little fire, put the coffee in. That was your breakfast. You did that, you felt human. But the K-ration was also monotonous. It was designed for short-term use, maybe 3 to 5 days. Soldiers in a Hurricane forest or on a long march to Rome ate them for weeks on end. Ernie Pyle, the famous war correspondent, wrote this: "Our soldiers cursed the K-ration. They would throw it away. Yet I've eaten K-rations for weeks, and I'm sure that without them I would have starved. As one soldier told me, it's a damn good ration, but I'd rather have a bad steak." If the K-ration was the quick snack, the C-ration was a full-course meal. Introduced in 1938, the ration Type C was the Army Standard Field Ration. It was bulky, heavy, and consisted of 2 cans. The M unit, the meat unit, contained the main course. There were a few varieties, but the most common were pork and beans, meat and vegetable stew, meat and vegetable hash, meat and spaghetti, and the most infamous, chopped ham, egg, and potato. The B unit, bread, had the supplements, including 5 biscuits, hard candies, sugar, and an accessory pack with the instant coffee. Like the K-ration, the C-ration was best hot. Soldiers would dump the meat and vegetable stew into their mess kit frying pan and heat it over a fire. A more ingenious method? They'd wedge the can against the engine manifold of their Jeep or tank. After a 20-minute drive, they'd pop it open, a hot meal courtesy of General Motors. If you can't heat it, you ate it cold. Soldiers described the cold meat and hash as dog food with congealed white fat, but it was 1,200 calories. It was fuel. And the final piece of the combat food puzzle was a D-ration bar. This looked like a Hershey's bar, but it was not candy. In 1937, the Army asked Hershey to create an emergency ration bar. The requirements were specific. It had to be high in calories, at least 600. It had to withstand high temperatures. It had to not taste very good. And the Army was serious. They didn't want soldiers eating their emergency ration as a snack. Hershey delivered. The D-bar was a blend of chocolate, sugar, oat flour, and cocoa fat. It was dense, bitter, and so hard you could barely bite through it. Soldiers called it Hitler's secret weapon. The dream of every soldier at the front line was a hot meal, and that meant a visit from the field kitchen. When a unit was pulled off the line for a rest or they were in a stable rear area, the Quartermaster Corps would send up the field kitchens. These were essentially restaurants on wheels. They didn't cook with fresh food. That was the A ration, and that was reserved for permanent bases or stateside. Frontline kitchens cooked B rations. A B ration wasn't a prepackaged meal. It was kind of a bulk ingredient kit, mostly canned or dehydrated, to allow cooks to make real hot meals. These included dehydrated potatoes, powdered eggs, canned bacon or sausage, large cans of vegetables, pre-mixed bread or biscuit flour, and huge urns of real brewed coffee. This was heaven. It was the first hot, non-canned food a soldier might have had in weeks. The B ration meal was served in a soldier's mess kit. You'd walk down the line, a scoop of hash in the main compartment, green beans in a small one, 2 pieces of bread in a flat lid, and you'd dip your canteen cup in to get it filled with coffee. This hot meal was a critical morale booster. It was a taste of civilization. General George S. Patton, known for his harsh discipline, understood this. While he often ate C rations with his men for show, he made sure his Third Army supply chain prioritized hot food whenever possible. He knew a hot breakfast could make a man feel like a soldier again, not just a survivor.
So how did this food actually get to the front, especially during battle? During combat, resupply was done at night. Jeeps and deuce-and-a-half trucks would make the perilous run from the battalion supply depot to the company command post, often under artillery or machine gun fire. After D-Day, the Allies advanced so quickly they outran their supply lines. To solve this, the Army created the Red Ball Express. This was a massive undertaking, a non-stop truck convoy system that ran 24 hours a day. These drivers drove on wrecked roads under the threat of air attack with no sleep to deliver the 3 B's: beans, bullets, and bandages. At the front, a squad leader would send 2 men back to the company command post. They'd return loaded down with bandoliers of M1 ammo and several wooden crates of K-Rations or C-rations. They'd drop these crates into the foxholes, and that was it. That was the resupply. A common question is, did officers eat better than the enlisted men? The answer is a classic yes and no. In combat, absolutely not. A platoon leader, a captain, or even a battalion commander ate the exact same K-rations or C-rations as the privates in their foxholes. They carried the same gear and ate from the same cans. It was a matter of practicality and leadership. Any officer who tried to hoard better food would lose the respect of his men instantly. However, in the rear echelons, things were different. At headquarters in, for instance, London or Paris, generals and their staff had access to A rations, fresh food, real eggs, fresh meat, and alcohol. This was a source of bitter resentment for the frontline soldiers who felt the rear echelon commanders were living in luxury while they were surviving on canned hash. But for 99% of combat experience, officers and enlisted men ate the same cold beans. The American supply chain was a marvel, but it wasn't perfect, and when it broke, the results were catastrophic for morale. In December 1944, the 101st Airborne was cut off and surrounded by the German army in the Belgian town of Bastogne. They were low on ammo, low on medical supplies, and critically low on food. Soldiers were reduced to eating 1 K ration per day. The 2,800 calorie ration was already insufficient for the freezing cold and constant combat. On 900 calories, they were actively starving. Major Dick Winters, commander of Easy Company, remembered the desperation. We were down to our last K rations. Men were saving the small fruit bars, bartering cigarettes for a single biscuit. The lack of food, more than the cold, was what drained the will to fight. When the weather finally cleared on December 23rd, C-47 transport planes flew over Bastogne to drop air supplies. But sometimes these drops weren't precise. Many crates full of C-rations, medicine, and ammo landed directly into German-held territory. The men watched their salvation fall into the hands of the enemy. The effect of food on morale cannot be overstated. A single hot meal could turn a company's attitude around. The lack of it could bring them to the breaking point faster than enemy bullets. What did the GIs actually like? It came down to the small things. First is coffee. The instant coffee in K rations was revolutionary. It was hot, bitter, caffeine-filled, and a reminder of home. Cigarettes. For many, the 4-pack of cigarettes was the most valuable item in the ration. Men who didn't smoke would trade their cigarettes for extra food, especially for the fruit bar or the D ration. In the cold, the sugar was energy. The dense sweet fruit bars and the hard as rock D-bars were hoarded. Spam was another one of these items. It was a godsend. It was the fat, it was the salt, and it could be fried in its own grease over a fire. It was a versatile, calorie-dense staple. The other guy's food, often liberated German or civilian food, captured German bread, a dense black rye type of bread, and sausages were prized. In Italy, GIs would trade their C-rations to civilians for fresh eggs or a bottle of wine. The food of World War II did more than just win a war. It fundamentally changed how Americans eat. Instant coffee went from a novelty to a staple in American households. Processed cheese, like the kind in K rations, led to the post-war development of Kraft singles. Canned meats like Spam became household names. Even M&Ms, which were developed as tropical chocolate for the D ration that wouldn't melt, became a national icon. The food of the American GI wasn't gourmet, it was fuel, mass-produced and shipped 3,000, 6,000, 9,000 miles. It was monotonous, scientifically formulated, and often eaten cold in the rain from a steel can. But it was there. More often than not, the American soldier, unlike its counterparts, ate. He had 2,800 calories he needed to load his rifle, fix his tank, and fight one more day. That food, in all its bland, canned, processed glory, was a physical manifestation of America's industrial might. It was a taste of logistics, and in the end, it was a taste of victory.